Johnny, just wait till he comes. Just wait till he comes.
I'll text you. I'll text you. Weird.
How's your time? Is it hard back to back?
Golf is easy though.
Do you get like a
Huh?
Hey, we'll start in about 5 minutes or a couple minutes. Hey guys, sorry I was a little late. We'll start in like a few minutes. Make sure you guys check the. Make sure you guys watch the link in terms of the multiple choice. Okay. And if you're here, Type your name real quick. Hey, Axel, this is Salvador Galvan. He's the one that you're going to be interning with next week or in 2 weeks.
Filipino.
No, can you hear me? No, I muted it because my other coaches were being ridiculous. So I just wanted to make sure you guys didn't hear any ridiculous things. We'll get started in about a minute. So I'm gonna try to go through today period 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a little bit of 9. It's a lot, but I'm gonna skim through the major parts of it, especially because we spent the last 3 weeks talking about period 8 and a whole quarter talking about period 7. Okay, here we go. We're gonna get started because we don't got that much time.
Oh no, I'm gonna be in the.
So any questions you guys have, just go ahead and type them, and then I'll try to get that. I will say this though: if you can look up your answer, like if it's an answer, or if you can look up your question, then don't ask it. So if it's something simple like when did it happen, or what does that, like what happened here, look it up, and then if you have questions in terms of that, after you've read that, then you can go ahead and let me know. But otherwise, I'm just gonna keep going. Okay. Is it just it's 5 of you, right? Okay, so here we go. Let's get started.
So who wanted it?
Andrew, sit closer.
Who wanted it? Then you're good. I thought it was Maggie.
Okay.
I'll get you a Maggie.
So we're gonna try to pace ourselves. We'll go maybe about the next 10 minutes on period 4, maybe a little less. Okay. So period 4, 1800 to 1848. We're still, yes, 1800 to 1848. The pivot points for this, 1800 is the revolution of 1800. I think that's where it ended yesterday, right? I talked about the peaceful transition of political parties from a federalist into a anti-federalist peaceful transition. Okay. Thomas Jefferson wins and becomes president. Yeah, you could say it's the anti-federalist, or you could say the Democratic Republic. Key concepts of period 4 actually happens with Marbury versus Madison. Okay, this is one of the, I think, 5 major court cases that you need to know. It's the first of the major 5 court cases. Essentially, Marbury versus Madison creates the power of judicial review, which initially under the Constitution, the judicial branch was the weakest branch of government. Okay, the strength lies in that they have life terms, but they didn't really have much power. Judicial review gives the judicial branch a lot of power by being able to interpret what is constitutional and what's not constitutional. Okay, so even if a law is made by Congress, they can go, the judicial branch can go, that's actually not constitutional. It doesn't follow the Constitution. Therefore, you can't do that. I'll give you a really good example. Recently, 2 years ago, Donald Trump tried to do a refugee ban. Okay. And actually a year and a half ago, he tried to do a refugee ban. Supreme Court, actually not a Supreme Court, a normal judge from one of the districts goes, that is unconstitutional. And so you can't do that. And so judges are able to strike down what presidents rule. Okay. The next major concept is the American system, Henry Clay's American system. Through using tariffs, a national bank, and creating internal improvements like canals and roads. Okay, remember, not everyone has, no, cars aren't big yet. Tariffs, a national bank. You're welcome. Okay. the improvements of the canals and new roads becomes big because during the 1800 to 1848, the next big thing that Thomas Jefferson does in his presidency is he doubles the size of America. He purchases Louisiana, Louisiana Purchase, right? He buys it from Napoleon, who's trying to fight and win a war over there, can't deal with another piece of land, and therefore he sells it for super, super cheap. Thomas Jefferson purchased it, okay? I believe 1803. So early in his presidency, or I guess not early, 3 years into his presidency. Okay. Another key concept of the early 1800s is Republican motherhood and the cult of domesticity, which pretty much says, woman, your job, your role is to be a wife and a mother. Your job is to raise good citizens. Okay, this starts to get pushed. This idea gets pushed back on in this end of this, the end of 1840, around 1848. Women start to push back and they go, "Hey, no, our role isn't just to be good housewives. We should be able to have certain rights too." Okay. Transcendentalism is a important term. Transcendentalism. Well, think of like something. It was a philosophical movement where they believe that, like, through nature and through your personal introspection and emotion, you can live a simple and good life. The major characters in this are Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Second Great Awakening happens here. Okay, just know that the Great Awakening happens in two parts. This is important in terms of periodization. If you get a question that has to do with the Great Awakening or religious movements in America, you can relate it between period 2 and period 4. Okay. And the last part that I would say is Jacksonian democracy. So 3 major presidents in this time: Thomas Jefferson, the beginning; James Monroe in the middle; and Andrew Jackson towards the end. Okay, or actually, not really towards the end, but middle end.
Can you say that again?
Thomas Jefferson as a president that begins the era. Thomas Jefferson that begins the era. James Monroe. And then Andrew Jackson. No, you should know. You can address them by their last. Jefferson, Monroe, and Jackson should be good enough. Okay. Now, the period of 1800 to 1848, there's a couple wars or battles, couple things that we have to deal with. The War of 1812, right, which there was impressment. American sailors were getting captured by British. American sailors were getting captured by British soldiers. Okay, and they were essentially trying to use their situation, their power, because they had a stronger navy, to like influence America and their actions, right? And so we're in period 4 right now, Fernanda. So in the middle of this time period, 1817 to 1825, is a presidency of James Monroe. The key thing that you need to know, key things that you need to know, is that Henry Clay's American system falls under President James Monroe, okay? And that Henry Clay wanted to help businesses through the transportation system, the canals and the roads, through tariffs on imported goods, and a national bank. Well, he wanted to help businesses. So in this time, 1800 to 1848, we're kind of, think of it as America as a kind of maturing, right? Where we're trying to figure out like what's best for us. Okay. And these tariffs on imported goods play a big role. If you guys ever get asked a question in terms of like tariffs, like the key to tariffs is that by taxing goods that get imported, people are encouraged to purchase things that were made in America. Okay. And that supports American businesses. And then the third part for Clay's American system was creating the national bank, okay, or chartering the national bank, which is important. We'll come back to the bank because we'll come back to the bank because Andrew Jackson tries to veto the bank. All right. But really quickly, in the era of good feelings is also this time where the Federalist Party disappeared. Remember, they messed up at the end of the last time period. They disappeared, Democratic Republicans. So the era of good feelings was supposedly an era of good feelings because there's only one political party. Okay. The Federalist Party. But even though it was a so-called era of good feelings, there were still a lot of issues of like the tariffs that were happening, as well as the roads and improvements, because who did that benefit the most? Which states? Which side?
The money one, South, no?
No, not the South, because the South relied on plantations, right? And so the North and the West, expansion west and the roads going west, it obviously benefited them, which is important. Okay. Under James Monroe was a compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And this is going to be key because this is what leads us into our next time period, essentially, right? Which is Missouri enters a union as a slave state. Maine enters as a free state. Missouri, slave state. Maine, free state. And it created a line that said anything north of this line is a free state. Anything south of this line is a slave state. Only exception would be Missouri, which lies just north of that border. Okay. The Monroe Doctrine, something that you need to know. Make sure you know the Monroe Doctrine. Which pretty much said that the U.S. was the new police of the Western world. Okay, North and South Americas. Pretty much, we were taking care of them, Latin America as well as North America. So Canada, Mexico, and everything in the South. Now this is big because remember, a lot of the colonies were in the South, right? Of other European colonies. Okay, and then the last part of this would be Jackson's democracy. So if you break it up, Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, and Jackson democracy. If you can understand these three presidents, you should be good. Okay, and associate all these different parts with the presidents. Jackson was the common man's president. He came from humble beginnings. Andrew Jackson promoted the spoil system, which is to the victor goes the spoils. So whoever wins gets to appoint people to the cabinet and gets to like yeah, so to the victor goes the spoils, right? That's the saying. So if I win presidency, I should be able to choose who is in office with me. Right?
Are you gonna go all the way to period 9?
I'm gonna try to. I'm getting through period 4 real quick right now. Okay. Tariff of abominations and nullification. This furthers the split and really ends the era of good feelings because all of a sudden this tariff protected home industry, which protected the North because the North was industrious. The North produced the textiles, the goods, while the South produced the raw goods, which that didn't really help them. Okay. Say that one more time. And the South didn't like it. Okay. It protected the North's goods. The North's goods because it protected what they've created. Okay. And the thing about tariff abominations was John C. Calhoun, the vice president of Andrew Jackson, resigned so that he can be part of the South. Okay. Which he withdrew and he created the doctrine of nullification, which goes, if a state doesn't want to agree with it, we don't have to agree with it. Okay. Yep. If Congress says something, we don't have to do it if we think it's unconstitutional. The XYZ affair is something that happened between the French and the colonists, or not colonists, Americans, where they labeled the French diplomats X, Y, and Z, and it just was a small period of tensions between the French and XYZ affair. French tension between French diplomats and because they wanted bribes from America, and Americans didn't want to give it to them. It's just an event that you could know. Okay, so if you think XYZ, think of like 3 people you don't really know their names. You're just gonna call them X, Y, and Z, and that's pretty much, and they're French. Okay, so Jackson's first of all the nullification and tariff abominations, but the second part of Jackson's democracy was his bank veto. So he did not want the bank to be rechartered because he thought, again, banks were run by rich, spoiled people, and that they were not helping the common man. Okay. Through that comes the Whigs. The Whigs as a political party that went against Andrew Jackson. And then minorly Panic of 1837 that collapsed many banks. Panic of 1837 where a lot of banks closed because people were afraid that the banks failed.
Banks failed?
Okay, now the last part that taints Andrew Jackson is the Trail of Tears. Okay, so 3 major parts: the tariff abominations and the nullification crisis. That has to do with like slaves and like what's benefiting the North and the South. The bank war, which has to do with common man versus the elite. And then lastly, yes, that's true, Frankie. And then lastly, the Trail of Tears, right? Which was he tried to move the Native Americans. He did move them. And he actually went against the court case. The court case is Worcester versus Georgia. So think of like Native Americans in the South, in Georgia. He lost that court case. Worcester versus Worcester versus Georgia. So during this whole time, John Marshall is the Chief Justice. So if you get a question asked about John Marshall, from Thomas Jefferson in this 1800 to 1848 was Marshall's court. John Marshall's court. He's the one that was involved in Marbury versus Madison. He was also involved in Worcester versus Georgia. He goes, Andrew Jackson goes, okay, cool. So John Marshall thinks that we shouldn't kick out these Native Americans. He's made his decision. Now let's see if he could do anything about it. So he went against the Supreme Court that said what his actions were about to be unconstitutional, and still did it. So here's test tip. Normally, very few APUSH questions are devoted to specific presidents. Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln are the exceptions. Because of his pivotal role in the nullification crisis, the bank war, and the forced removal of Native Americans, a number of APUSH questions focus on Andrew Jackson and his policies. Okay, so there's a popular political cartoon of Andrew Jackson sitting on a throne because one was leading the common man, but second, he acted almost as a tyrant. Courts say no, he still did it anyways, right? He took what other presidents did, tried to take it away. Okay, so he acted really as like a tyrant, and was important in that sense. Okay. Period 4 has a few other things, but main concepts. You should know transcendentalism and utopian communities and the Great Awakening. But Texas independence. Okay, so you need to know that Americans moved to Mexico, which Texas was part of Mexico at that time, and they tried to take Mexico to become a part of America. They moved there and they went, we want this to be part of America. Okay, so and that's kind of what ends up changing this end part. Okay, and I'll get to that in the pivot point. Use some money now against him. Yes, that's true. And do what? Did Martin Van Buren do what? Okay, so and then the role of women. Okay, so towards the end of the period, the cult of domesticity, like women started to go, look, we need to fight for our rights. Because up until then, it was rich white men that could vote and could do all these things. So women gathered together under the Seneca Falls Convention, which is 1848.
Domestic what?
Seneca Falls Convention.
The
Cult of domesticity, so like domesticating. Seneca Falls. The Indian Removal Act may have been done by Martin Van Buren, but the Trail of Tears was during Andrew Jackson's presidency. Okay. So women tried to fight for their rights to retain property after marriage. Okay, this is where they wrote the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, where they started off in the sense of like same as a Declaration of Independence that we wrote to Britain, but using it as like, hey, look, men, look what you're doing. Like, you're not letting us own land. You don't let us do this. You don't let us do that. They wanted to have the right to divorce. Okay. They wanted equal educational opportunities. It did not ask for equal pay. Okay. But it focused on like basic rights. Okay. And suffrage, so voting, and education. Okay. So that's where 1848 ends. That's the main pivot point. I'm going to go into period 5 real quick. So there's a little bit of overlap. 4 years overlap. 1844. Okay. This overlap is the Mexican War. Okay. And Manifest Destiny. So the idea of Manifest Destiny is the biggest part of this. So the right to expand. And so 1844 to 1877 is the period of conflict with the Civil War and Reconstruction. This is important because if you look at it, excuse me, if you look at it, expansion led to the Civil War. Okay, so initially everything's balanced. Missouri comes in as a slave state, Maine comes in as a free state. One slave state comes in south of the border, one comes in north of the border. The further west we go, the more territory we try to acquire, and the more expansion that we do, the more complicated things get because more states try to join in, more population with that needs representation. Mm-hmm. Okay. So during the Mexican-American War, we as America tried to instigate. Okay, James Polk is the president at this time. He tries to instigate the war, saying, "Oh, look, the Mexicans crossed over into our side of the border, and we need to go send our military." Okay, and so he pleads to Congress to go, "Hey, we need to send our military. Let's declare war. Look, we're gonna react because they attacked and killed American people. Therefore, we need to go and do something about it." Okay. The best way to memorize dates is to understand the pivot points and why each part is important. So if you can kind of like know, like for example, 1844, like period 5 is about the Civil War and pre-Civil War, the Mexican-American War as the beginning of that, and the end of Reconstruction. You're going to be able to understand these dates. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So then, ending the Mexican-American War is a Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right? And through that, U.S. gains California and New Mexico. And Texas, south of Texas, is the Rio Grande. Thanks, Alexa. Say that one more time. Yeah, so eventually it becomes a debate.
Wait, you said America gains California and
New Mexico.
New Mexico.
You said Mexico.
I said Mexico.
And California's free, right? New Mexico.
Okay. The Wilmot Proviso called for the prohibition of slavery through anything we acquired from the Mexican War. It wasn't a federal law, but it was endorsed.
The Wilmot
Wilmot Proviso. We got New Mexico and California, but yeah, modern day Utah, Nevada, that's that area, that westward area. Yes, the Battle of the Alamo is part of the war. Part of sorry, Texas independence fight prior to this, not this specific war. Mia, hopefully that answers your question.
1846.
Try to, Maria, look up the definition for woman proviso. It's just a yeah, it's a definition that you can get. So now leading into the Mexican-American War, now it's not about slave or free necessarily. It's about representation. Okay, if more representatives go in the South, then they can make more laws that promote pro-slavery, pro-Southern states. The North was not necessarily against slavery in the sense that they cared so much about African-American rights or African slave rights. They cared more about the laws and things that were going to affect them. Okay. And so then comes the rise of the abolitionists, and prime abolitionists. The two big ones are William Lloyd Garrison, who wrote The Liberator. William Lloyd Garrison. The Liberator. He pushed for the freeing of slaves and women's rights as well. And then probably the more famous one that you guys know, Frederick Douglass. Every test that I've seen in the past so far, the last few years, have said something about William Lloyd Garrison. So just be ready to use him as a reference, okay? The Liberator was a paper that like promoted
It was like one of the
anti-slavery. We'll get there to John Brown and Harper's Ferry in a second. Okay, so we have the Missouri Compromise of 1820, and then the Compromise of 1850 admits California as a free state, abolishes slave trade in D.C., passes a more stricter Fugitive Slave Act that punished white people as well as black people. Popular sovereignty comes into play right now, okay, after the Compromise of 1850.
Wait, what was California free state, stricter fugitive slave law, and
Abolition of slave trade in D.C., and then allowed governments in New Mexico and Utah without like a decision to be slave or free. Okay, which then comes this concept of popular sovereignty. Okay, and popular sovereignty is that let the people decide if they are slave or free. Okay, whoever settles there, whoever lives there, will have the final say, or at least have the say to whether or not it should be slavery, if slavery should be permitted there. The people, the residents, the people that settle there. So if I settle into Kansas, the people of Kansas get to decide, should slavery be permitted here?
wait, so if you move to Kansas, the people in Kansas
We'll decide.
if you're a slave, or
No, if slavery should be allowed.
oh,
Because prior to that, it was if you're north of this line, you're a slave state. If you're south of this line, you're a slave state. Now, it's whichever state you are. It doesn't matter if you're north or south of the line. It's if the people there decide. What's that?
Wait, I'm just getting the wait like isn't the so like associated with the Kansas Nebraska?
Yeah, and so the Kansas Nebraska Act essentially just like what do you mean by associated?
Didn't they like go hand in hand?
Kind of in the sense that like it didn't allow for free like it allowed for popular sovereignty in certain states versus a just slave free.
Do we have to do like bloody Kansas or something?
We're getting there. Kansas Nebraska Act is introduced so that Kansas and Nebraska both become states. And by doing the Kansas Nebraska Act, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 is repealed. So all of a sudden now there's no sectional divide, right? There's no North is free, South is slave. So people are now trying to figure out, oh shoot, so there's no line anymore. We just gotta fight for it, right? And so Bleeding Kansas comes into play right here, where all of a sudden there's no the lines are blurry. It's not a north-south anymore. It's whoever lives there gets to say. And so Bleeding Kansas, they fight for it. Like they literally go in and they like massacre people. No, John Brown's raid, he sees the arsenal at Harper's Ferry. That I think John Brown participated in Bloody Kansas, but he wasn't the main character. It was between both. So the people that were pro-slavery fought physically
People of Kansas pretty much had
to figure to gain control of determining whether or not Kansas was a slave or free state. Nativism is important in the sense of you need to know what it is. But yeah, a lot of the nativism and jingoism happens in the next time period. John Brown's raid, you can associate that with he was really trying to abolish slavery. And he tried to get slaves to revolt. He's seen as a lunatic. Okay. Some people call him a martyr. Some people call him a lunatic. Make sure you know the Dred Scott case as well. Okay.
The guys.
That slaves are property and they cannot sue.
So slaves are property.
Slave is property and you cannot sue. So same way if I hit the table can't sue me. So if I hit a slave can't sue me.
So is that what was decided in Dred Scott?
So test tip. Good idea to keep straight the compromises, acts, and Supreme Court decisions that affect the slavery. So the Missouri Compromise of 1820, Kansas-Nebraska Act, Dred Scott decision, Compromise of 1850, okay, understanding popular sovereignty. Those are just key things. Everything we just went through, just make sure you know those, okay? Election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln won, okay, the Civil War happens. You need to know the advantages of the North and the South. Okay, advantages of the North and the South. The North had a good railroad network, hence the expansion of the roads, right, and canals. The North had stronger navy, had a larger population, had a functioning central government. Good. South had. Say that one time. South had cash crops, so they had and they also, yes, Frankie, they had better military leadership. Okay, not necessarily like you need to be careful about leadership because the North had a better governmental leadership. The South had better military leadership. Hmm. It was the South. The Civil War was fought in the South. Therefore, they had home turf. Yep. They had the coastline across on the south was hard. Even though the North Navy was better, they weren't able to like stop them from leaving and exporting.
The coastline is harsh.
Was like long and big. Yeah, it was hard to defend. Big one. The South was fighting for something, right? The Confederates were fighting for their livelihoods. And similarly to the Revolution, the North was divided. They weren't sure if they really cared that much about the slave rights. They didn't have necessarily the best military, and so they were kind of at a disadvantage in that sense. The South had a smaller population, so even though it's bigger and they might have a lot of people, they had a lot of slaves, not a lot of soldiers to fight. So the Battle of Antietam, you need to know the Battle of Antietam and the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm going to skip through that. But essentially, Abraham Lincoln goes, look, slaves, you're free. Okay. And he tries to gain slave support to fight for the North.
Was that the Battle of what?
Antietam.
Are we still here?
5.
Oh my God.
And if you remember, if you guys remember in class, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free slaves on the border states. Okay, the border states. So I think I have a list of them: Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, Delaware. You don't need to necessarily know all of them. Just know that Kentucky, Missouri, that area. Okay.
It didn't free slaves there.
It only freed slaves in the South.
So the border is
In the middle states. Yes, kind of. And everything even east of that. Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, right? And this is big because if Abraham Lincoln freed those slaves would join the Confederates. At this point in time, most of the Confederate states were in the South that were trying to fight together. The middle states had benefits in the North and the South, right? Because they were in the middle. And so they were hesitant to join the Confederate sides. And Abraham Lincoln could not afford, if all those states joined us, even though those were all slave states, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri were all slave states. If they joined the Confederate side, it would be much harder for the Union to win. So he didn't antagonize them, did not free their slaves, but freed everyone else's slaves. Because he figured, hey, if we win this war, those middle slave states would be free anyways. Okay? So know that. High tariffs to protect from foreign competition was passed by Congress. Homestead Act, which gave land to people, okay, that would settle west and try to get people to move. Okay, this is a time period of the railroads, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, like meeting in the middle in Utah. Okay. Union Pacific and Central Pacific.
No, please don't.
Should eat. I'll take over.
So, last part, I'm gonna wrap up this short time period, 1844 to 1877. 1844 to 1877. So, Civil War ends 1865. Okay, and the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and 15th Amendment become big. You must memorize the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Okay, 13th Amendment, abolish slavery. 14th Amendment said that anyone born in America is citizens. Can they gain equal protection of the laws? In the context of slavery, it gave slaves the rights to be citizens, essentially, okay? Be citizens. And the 15th Amendment gave them the actual right for citizenship, which is you cannot be, the right to vote, suffrage, cannot be denied through the color of your skin or your race. What does this exclude? Gender. So all men can vote. All male citizens can vote right now, but women still can't vote.
I thought they were like saying they can't be educated. Didn't they like give them black votes?
Yes. So even though they were technically legally allowed to vote, there were things that were put in place in the South that did not allow them to vote. Okay. And that's actually really good because that leads us to the idea of Reconstruction. And this idea from 1865 to 1877, these 12 years, 1877, 1865 to 1877 was Reconstruction. And they tried to reconstruct physical buildings that were destroyed during the Civil War. They tried to reconstruct the ideas of the mentality of the South, okay, which was that Black people had the right to vote, right to citizenship and life, and to pursue jobs and equality. Okay, but again, people don't want them to vote. Why? It goes back to the focus of representation. 1844 to 1877 is purely about representation in every single aspect. Because if you have representation, you gain the power. Things are in favor for you. So they didn't want Black people to vote because if Black people voted, who would they elect? They would elect other Black people. And if they elected other Black people, they would take rights away from white people, which would be, and so slowly things would be taken away. That's why people don't want them to vote. Okay, that's why they set in, like, even though they were technically legal to vote under the 15th Amendment, they gave them literacy tests. They set in these like you have to be able to pay, right? Poll taxes. Okay, they did these things like the grandfather clause. You can only vote if your grandpa or your parents, your dad could vote it. But wait, if slaves just were allowed to vote, there's no way they could be grandfathered in because they weren't able to vote before. So all these different things were put in place, okay? And the end of slavery began a new type of slavery, pretty much sharecropping. So owners would say, look, well, I can't make you work for free, but I'll pay you a little bit if you live on my land. I'll let you live on the land. You can live here for free. You can earn a little bit of money, get some food, but be a part of this. And so sharecropping sucked in, because obviously a lot of Black people weren't like, oh, like, these are different opportunities that I have. They're like, this is the only opportunity I have.
Kind of like an indentured servant.
Yes. Except indentured servants can get out of it.
Yeah, they have a contract.
They have a contract, then they leave after. Yes, yes. But then, like, once they get into it, they get into a cycle of debt, right? And it's like, if you don't produce a crop, then all of a sudden you're in debt to me. Then comes the black codes under Reconstruction. And the black codes essentially limited limited their rights and opportunities. So the black codes were a system of codes, right, set in place to stop black people from advancing. Black people from advancing. Okay. Different than slave codes. Slave codes, right, were like how white people regulated slaves. Black codes is post Civil War. And so the best way to memorize how this ends is the end of Reconstruction comes with the Compromise of 1877. Under the election of 1876, there are two candidates, one from the North, one from the South. Okay, the South and the North came to agreement that if the North removes their like military and tried to essentially, if the North stopped Reconstruction of the South, they would give the North the presidency. And that's why this is the end of it, because the end of Reconstruction marks the end. It pretty much said the North gave up on the South. Right? The North gave up on the South. They go, hey, look, yeah, we'll take the presidency. We'll stop trying to reconstruct the South, and we'll be good.
What was the compromise of 1877? Was that it? Rutherford B. Hayes, right, Coach?
Reconstruction of the South.
Oh, that's it? That's it? Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes. Was he the president?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how. So yeah, Rutherford B. Hayes becomes the president. Wait, that's so funny. And so this is the next. Okay, so 1877 you could say is a turning point because that ends, the pivot point ends this time period. But for the next period, we actually go backwards to 1865. But you have to look at it in a different lens, right? Which is now we're looking at the rise of big businesses. We're looking at monopolies and all that stuff. Okay. I know it's 8:08. Let's try to push through this part. I'm going to try to get through period 6 really quickly. Big businesses. You need to know the two key terms, which is horizontal and vertical integration. Let me explain this really quickly, okay? So horizontal, if you just draw a horizontal line, you own every single aspect of it. So if I own all the gas stations, gas companies, I can control how much the price goes. So if I make the price $4 and I own all the gas companies, everyone's gonna have to pay $4 no matter what. If I have vertical integration, it is essentially I own every aspect of the production of it, from the mining of the oil. I own like every production, every step of the production process. So I own like the workers that mine the oil, the people that clean the oil, the people that sell the oil, the people that ship the oil. All of a sudden, I can choose how much I pay, and I can make a lot of money that way either.
So horizontal is just the base, like just the businesses, and vertical is everything else.
Vertical is you own everything. So if I owned like all the gas stations, that's horizontal, right? Because if you look at it, I own every part of this. Like, so don't think of a timeline. Think of a think of like when you go to the gas station and pump it. That's the exit. Like you buy oil from the mining of the oil, right? And so if you follow that,
you just own the gas station.
That's horizontal. Okay. Yeah, I throw stuff at them too. Alexa, horizontal integration is a type of monopoly. And actually, that horizontal integration is the illegal way. So for someone to own all the oil companies, okay, is illegal because then they can control the prices and they can essentially bankrupt and make things really difficult for people to purchase oil. Okay. Moving on from the industrial, so you need to know two key terms: social Darwinism, and the gospel of wealth, which essentially was there are a lot of rich business owners, and they said that the same reason that there's survival of the fittest for animals, there's survival of the fittest for people. You're rich because you're just better equipped to be rich.
That's gospel wealth.
Social Darwinism. Think of gospel of wealth as like the gospel, like a church thing. Okay. So the gospel of wealth says, hey, I'm rich. I have a duty to the people around me to like help them and to financially help them.
Oh, you're right. Okay, the like 1900s and above is like fresh.
Yeah, that's the hope. And this leads to the end of period 6, which is nice. Okay, so these are the main concepts. Seriously, we're almost done with period 6. The populace. Yeah, we'll have a break in a second. Populist Party or the People's Party. Okay, was a party for the agrarian part of society, the farmers. Okay, and they believe that money should be backed by silver and not gold. Silver should back the dollar because silver was more available, right? And so they believe that that by doing that, they would be more well off and they'd be okay.
I remember this. Yeah, Mr. Demon Knock can find him. You only got a drink. This was $7.
So
Really?
okay, stay focused. All right. So the next part, why did the Populist Party fail? Because they weren't elected. Okay, they weren't because Western and Southern farmers weren't sure in terms of how to achieve their political goals.
Isn't like democracy and Populist Party both chose one candidate?
Eventually, yeah. Discovery of gold led to the increase of allowed farmers to like purchase more on credit.
I like it better than
I like the coffee bean. It's like
And the Democratic Party ended up consuming populist programs. So the Democratic Party eventually takes a lot of the beliefs of the Populist Party and then uses it to gain traction. So even though to gain traction in the future. So although the Populist Party failed, it eventually leads to the growth of the Progressive Party. Progressive Party, which we'll talk about next. William Jennings Bryan.
Yep. Against
William Jennings Bryan lost against McKinley.
Yes. Yeah. Wait, no, I thought you. Oh no.
Lost. McKinley won.
They were too split.
McKinley got assassinated.
Okay, so
And Teddy Roosevelt.
hey, let's take like a 3-minute break real quick. Okay, let's take a 3-ish minutes break, and then we're gonna go through 7 and 8 super quick, and I'll try to get through 9 in the next 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Okay, be right back, guys.
No. Oh,
They can hear us now.
yeah. Ask them if they have any questions. Wait, no, they said they could hear us earlier.
No, they can hear us now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Mr. Lou brought
Bananas.
bananas and granola bars and water.
Yeah.
And he got us drinks.
What food do you guys want for tomorrow? We will
Oh my
request.
God, Johnny.
Hey, boy, move.
Where are you from? This guy's from Florida.
Florida. Whoa.
Why did the 16-to-1 gold to silver ratio fail?
You better
I don't
show
know,
me.
man.
You're
Please
finna have to
explain.
Google that one.
Where are you guys from?
Not me.
We're from
No, Kiri.
New
They're
Zealand.
talking about Florida people.
Florida.
San Diego.
I'm not
This
from
guy's
San
from
Diego.
Chicago. There's Florida and Chicago?
I'm from Jacksonville. What's up?
I'm from Seattle.
I think they're just ignoring you, Luke.
No, they're not.
Social.
SoCal.
SoCal.
It's SoCal.
Okay.
It's social.
Oh, there's
We
not
are all
even
from South San
Africa.
Diego.
We
Oh,
are
no, he's
from
coming back. He's
South
coming back. Let me mute it.
North Carolina.
Yeah, sorry, I had to mute it real quick. Actually, hold on. Sorry, the restroom just opened.
You're having a party. Let me come through.
Alexa, stop inviting people to your party. She posted up a poster on my wall. Had to rip it down. Okay, here we go. So let's like 6 is 1865 to 1898. And sorry, I did forget to mention something. Kevin here, who should be also talking right now. That part during the Gilded, during the Populist Party and a little prior to that, is known as the Gilded Age. Okay, this was coined by Mark Twain. This was period 6, yeah, known as the Gilded Age. Okay. So it was known as the Gilded Age because even though there was a lot of crap that was going on, there was a silver lining which made it all seem okay. So like the richness of businesses and things going well made it seem like things were going well, but in reality there were a couple things that there were problems. There were a couple of problems that were a couple issues. Okay. And then you need to know during this time 2 things. Sorry, I totally blanked out on this. But the idea of like labor and labor unions that start to get created. Okay. In response to monopolies and big business owners that were taking advantage of immigrants, which the wave of immigration. Okay. The wave of immigrations that happened, the Italians and Germans in Chicago and New York. Okay, I use that example. East and like the Midwest area too. You just need to know that there are a couple waves of immigrants. Is that where's pizza? Where's pizza come from? Right, Chicago and New York. Okay, so Italians settling there. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. After all the Chinese immigrants came and decided that helped build the railroads. Americans sought to exclude the Chinese people from coming in. Okay.
So it's just a block.
Mm-hmm.
What were the wealthy immigrants? Were they Germans? Who were the wealthy immigrants?
Jewish people.
Jewish? No, weren't they like Germans or no?
I know Western Germans, and the Irish, no Germans.
Before, yeah.
6 million.
So, and then two key things that you need to know: the Knights of Labor. Actually, 3, I guess. This is period 6. Yeah, sorry, I had to go back to this. Knights of Labor, which became like one of the initial unions. Initial unions.
Initial?
Yeah.
I mean, even then, Frankie just has those 2 up, and he had terrifying. I was the only person.
The industrial workers of the world, uniting laborers, regardless of race, and the Pullman strike, 1894. Okay, this has to do with the car. I think I explained this to you guys during the last review, right?
No, that's Homestead.
Homestead strike. Okay.
Wait, you said Pullman strike?
The Pullman strike's the one with the car, the rail cars.
Oh, wait.
George Pullman owned owned the cars, and then remember he owned a little town, and
It was like
the wages went down, but the wages went down, and that's okay because sometimes you go into depression. But then George Pullman increased, or not increase, increased rent, and so made it impossible to live there. So the strike, they went on strike, and because all these people were part of a union, it froze all of America.
It's something where it said like they send in troops or like sending people.
Oh, is it that one? The
Mhm.
president sent in the troops.
What is that? I think so, right?
I think so.
They did send in troops to make sure the strike stopped.
One of the
Cool. Are we? Let's see. Yeah, Joshua. Yes. Okay. Period 7. I'm really gonna try to get through this really quickly. Okay. Especially because this was this past semester. So 1890 to 1945. This is a big one because so many things happen. So you need to know the different progressives. Okay. You need to know one progressive president, Teddy Roosevelt. Okay. You need to know what he did. He fought for natural parks, right? National parks with John Muir. If big stick policy, okay, and the Roosevelt corollary, okay. Panama. Yep, the Panama Canal. Okay, creating the Panama Canal. I would say if you're in my class, you need to make sure you know your progressive that you did your research on. Okay, so always have one of those in the back of your pocket. If you don't know one, Jane Addams, okay, and the Whole House. You need to know one or two key progressives so that in case you're asked to write about progressives, you have a specific example to write through. Okay. There are a couple. So Jacob Riis, who photographed the slums of New York. Okay. You have Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle, that exposed the meatpacking industry and how immigrants were not treated fairly, and workers. Upton Sinclair, Sinclair. He wrote The Jungle.
And that made like the food packs, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had to wash your hands and stuff like that.
If you're in my class, go ahead. If you guys want to throw out some more of the reformers that you guys looked at. Okay. Again, the point of progressivism. Now, before I forget this, they tried to use government to help society and societal problems. So progressives were your middle class. They weren't your lower class. And this is why progressives were more effective at change than the Populist Party. The Populist Party was primarily farmers, right? And so they didn't really have much power or say. The progressives, on the other hand, was a middle class that had time, that had the ability to influence, okay? And that becomes big.
So they try to use government to solve society.
Yep. They try to pass laws. They try to shed light in terms of like what's going on, okay? Some of the goals of progressivism was to create a more democratic America, so direct election of senators, right? And not being able to not having the corruption of senators. A goal of progressivism was women's suffrage. They try to take away corruption. and they tried to regulate businesses. And so this comes in the form of like child labor laws. This comes in the example of antitrust acts, right? The Clayton Antitrust Act, not allowing monopolies to exist. Regulating businesses in the Pure Food and Drug Act, so like not allowing like contamination of goods, right? So things we take for granted today, a lot of that happened in the progressive era, right? Reason why you guys can't work more than I think 20 hours a week, okay? Like child labor laws, unless it's the weekend. During the week, you can't work more than 20 hours during the weekday.
Wait, it's like also. So they're also like they like stuff like when they had like the burning.
What do you mean?
Like,
are you thinking of like a specific incident?
not really. Just like I don't know, just like the buildings burning down. That's what I mean.
Yeah, so like creating, like making sure that there are fair things that were fair practices, right? Because businesses would exploit not just the workers, but they'd exploit the people purchasing it. And so if they're like making crappy buildings or crappy food, like all of a sudden these businesses were held accountable. Okay. And in terms of exposing, there's a term you need to know called muckrakers, which were the journalists that decided to expose the Low Society. Good, Luke. Right. So that's Upton Sinclair writing the book. That's Jacob Riis taking the pictures. There are people that wrote books, right? Ida Tarbell. If you're in my class, you guys remember doing the gallery walk with the different pictures. Okay. So at any point in time during, and I encourage my classes, same thing for you guys. Like at any point in time when you guys are at the test and you're like, oh my gosh, there's that thing that we did, like close your eyes, try to imagine the activity that you did and try to pull things out because your teacher made that activity for a specific reason. And so you need to be able to like try to recall some of that. So at one point or another, you probably learned some of these muckrakers or these progressives. You have to be able to pull that out. Okay, you need to start pulling things from your memory, if that makes sense. Okay, and so for us, that means going into the pictures and the political cartoons, right? The various write-ups that you guys did. Jacob Riis was a muckraker. Are you out here? Say, King.
Was it like a thing, or was it just a term? Or was it like an actual?
It was an actual like term. They were called muckrakers.
Okay, so it wasn't like an actual thing. You joined it.
No.
Like it was just a term.
Yeah. Yeah, so Boss Tweed would be one of the key people to know in terms of exposing corruption within society. Okay, Boss Tweed and the scandal. Boss Tweed. Okay, so if you need to look that up, that's just something that you could look up. Yeah, because he was running a corrupt scandal ring where like he was putting himself in government, and there were other corrupt politicians that were like encouraging that, and so he got exposed. But this is actually earlier, not during this time. Yes. So yeah, Boss Tweed goes under political machines, which is the Gilded Age. So, but no, we're not. But like the progressives, like were some of the people that brought out like those issues. Okay. Big result of the progressive era is the 19th Amendment. Okay, the right for women to vote. This is period 7. Someone just asked about Boss Tweed, so I decided to throw that in. 19th Amendment, the right for women's suffrage. Okay. Also what you need to know is like if 13, 14, 15 were Reconstruction amendments, Okay. Then you got to look at 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21st amendments as progressive amendments. Okay. Because these are the amendments that essentially like represented the time period. If you can know these amendments, at least the major ones, you're going to be okay. Well, technically 16, 17 too, because it talks about a direct election of senators, which is part of what the progressive era was about, right? But the 18th Amendment was a big one. So before I jump to the 19th, the 18th is a big one because the women progressives fought against drinking, the temperance movement, right? Lips that touch alcohol shall not touch mine, right? And they won. Like starting in the early 1900s, a lot of states banned alcohol. Before it became an amendment in the Constitution, the 18th Amendment prohibited alcohol, right? And then shortly after, a couple years down the road, 21st Amendment repeals that and says, okay, alcohol should be allowed again. 1929, I believe. Temperance is no alcohol. Okay, to practice temperance is to practice like abstinence of alcohol. Yep. Look it up, but it talks. One of them talks about the direct election of senators, which was part of what the progressives were. Just look them up and just kind of skim through it. You guys should be good. Okay. And then the 19th Amendment, they fought for women's rights, and so women were finally able to vote. Think about it this way: 1848. Okay, 1848. They fought for. Women's rights and minority rights and slave rights, African American rights. African Americans got it first in 1865. Okay, women didn't get the right to vote until 1920, 1919, 1920. Okay. Okay. W.E.B. Du Bois, you need to know the difference between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. We are in period 7. See ya. See you tomorrow. He was, he did help found the NAACP. That's right. Du Bois. So Du Bois wanted to work with white people. Booker T. Washington wanted separation.
Booker T was like one of like the
Yep. Early on, yeah. But he advocated for more like looking for the opportunities, economic opportunities, and like taking your best shot. But he didn't talk about integration and working with people. You need to know a little bit about imperialism, open door policy with China. It is important, but we've recently gone through some of these things. World War I, the key out of World War I is Wilson's 14 points, and open diplomacy, freedom of the seas. Okay. Meaning like seas are open for everybody. And the U.S. never ratified the Treaty of Versailles, and they didn't join the League of Nations. Okay, President Wilson wanted to, but they ended up not because ended World War I.
You said imperialism. Is that like mainly in like Africa?
Yes. No, and South America.
Yeah, South America.
Yeah. Yep. Latin America. That area. Well, like Spanish American War, right? Think Spanish American War. Think Philippines. Our involvement in Philippines. Okay.
Is that all we need? What was it? What was the imperialist president? Was it just Roosevelt?
Roosevelt was no, and Woodrow Wilson. We didn't join the League of Nations because there was a Senator Lodge, that really opposed it, and he argued, and Congress. It was a back and forth. It essentially was a stalemate, and they couldn't get that done. Okay. 1920s, the Roaring 20s, right? Things are going well. Women started to get their jobs. Okay. Especially post World War I in that economy, things started to seem good. Then things went really crappy. Stock market crash in 1929. Okay, 1920s. You need to know a little bit about, like, you just need to know that there's like jazz, the lost generation. All right, see you, Khatib. Remember, 6:30 tomorrow morning. I'll be in my classroom if you guys need anything. Okay, really quickly, and then this is where nativism. Sorry, I know you were waiting for this part, but nativism, where the KKK started to come up. Okay. This is where religious fundamentalism, the Monkey Scopes trial. Man, I need to cut down some of these things for you. Okay, so let me just kind of explain. Hopefully, you guys will remember some of these things. But FDR and the New Deal to get us out of the Depression, and the Depression strikes us pretty hard because, well, one, everyone was buying off of credit. But two, the 1920s is all about consumerism and just buying and buying and buying unnecessarily. So that becomes a problem, right? The Dust Bowl in Oklahoma becomes a big problem too and contributes to that. And as a result, FDR goes, look, we need a couple things now. Although, let me clarify this. The review, essentially, my final is going to be similar to an AP test, so it could help you if you want, Brianna. We're still in period 7. Period 7 is pretty long. We're still in the middle of period 7. But FDR creates these New Deal policies in 2 waves, okay? But the thing about the New Deal policies, some people argue that that's what got us out of depression, but the reality is they kind of just kept us afloat. A lot of New Deal policies failed. Some of them still are around today. Social Security Act, a couple different ones. Okay, so make sure, and that's another one that you guys might want to try to recall your individual research project for your New Deal. Okay, and the posters that you guys made.
They specifically ask for specific deals.
They won't, but you should have a few in the back pocket, in your back pocket, just in case you can explain and use an example, right? Because you explaining to me what the New Deal is good. You explaining with examples of the New Deal makes me know that you know it. Okay. Yeah, there's so many different ones.
And how back when you said APUSH questions were like they don't really ask about specific presidents except for Jackson and Lincoln.
Those are mainly, yeah.
Does it also like apply to like Roosevelt?
No, I mean Roosevelt's gonna, yeah. You should know Roosevelt. You should definitely know. Okay. Not everyone was in favor of the New Deal. Okay. And because of that, FDR, because some of the courts were ruling that it was unconstitutional. And so as a result, she's tried to add 9 more Supreme Court justices. Yeah, he tried to add more justices to make it less constitutional. It didn't work. Okay. I'll read a couple of these impacts of the New Deal, which could be good. New Deal programs are partially successful in reducing unemployment and reviving the economy. So gave people jobs, gave people something to do when there was not much money to pay people to do things. New Deal helped African Americans survive the Great Depression. The New Deal sought to restructure the U.S. capitalism and not replace it. So it was more about reform rather than changing ideas, really. Okay. And to promote social welfare. Okay. So people that needed help were able to get help to some extent. Here's a test tip. Be sure to have a solid understanding of the causes of the Great Depression and the purposes of the programs of the New Deal. It represents a tremendous increase in the size and the scope of the federal government in dealing with social issues. So some of the ones that they put, for example, the FDIC is one of the big ones that you should know. The FDIC, you can look up what it stands for. Essentially, the FDIC made sure that if you put money into a bank, that you would be able to get money out, right? You see that today. You walk into a bank, it says insured by the FDIC, right? Well, it's that if you put money into a bank, you don't have to worry about it disappearing, which was a response to the bank crash, right? Not just the stock market crash, but when people tried to withdraw money from the bank, but they had used it all for like credit stuff.
So did the crash happen because people were buying too much stuff?
Yes, so too much purchasing on credit, not enough trust and support in the banking system, and
too many jobs, or
well,
that
that became the result.
Oh, I see.
And then comes World War II, which really gets us out of it. Okay, World War II is what gets us out of the Depression. Pearl Harbor takes us in. Okay. Huh? You can know you should know a few events. Maybe you should know definitely who we were allied with, England and the Soviet Union. Okay. You need to know that. Yeah, and then eventually we turn our backs on the Soviet Union, and then that's when the Cold War happens. And then so during World War II, again, you don't need to worry about those battles. It's about U.S. history. It's about what was women's role. Rosie the Riveter. Okay, key, like women working in the factories while men were out fighting. Okay, you need to talk about Native Americans, the Navajo code talkers. You need to know about African Americans, the Tuskegee Airmen that fought in an all black like Air Force. Okay, that fought. So like minorities played a role in fighting too, because yes. And so essentially, the military wasn't integrated yet. And during World War II, it wasn't integrated yet because again, it's pre-Civil War time. Okay, or pre-Civil Rights time. Sorry. Japanese Americans getting interned, big part of it, right? There's a court case, which is the next court case you should know, Korematsu versus United States. And then to end period 7, understanding the bomb, the Manhattan Project, the Trinity test. If you guys remember watching, why am I blanking out on it? Somebody help me with the name of the documentary we watched. But there's a documentary on like the Manhattan Project, the developing nuclear bombs. Okay, the nuclear bombs to drop on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Atomic Cafe, thank you, Perez. Good job. You guys are so good.
Good job, Chris. Chris, you're gonna get 5.
So Harry S. Truman uses an atomic bomb, and it made Japan surrender in a few days. Okay. I don't want to go too much into period 8 because I think we're at that point in time where your brains are probably frying. But simply 1945 to 1980 is the era of the Cold War. Cold War, civil rights. Okay, that's what you got to know. Cold War, civil rights. So key phrases in Cold War: containment, right? Truman wanted to contain communism. He didn't try to like change communist countries. He tried to make sure that no more communist countries would pop up. Period 8, yep. Sorry, Joshua. Yes, I'll go through writing in about 5 minutes. Okay. And then the Korean War, Vietnam War. Oh, you need to know the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, right? Which was the response. Remember, World War One. The reason we got into World War Two was because. See ya. Yeah, if anything, I can take it home. Okay. The reason we got into World War II is because World War One, we just screwed over Germany. And that's why that came up. So the Marshall Plan sought to help and aid countries. And also by doing that, it was twofold, not just to aid countries to not go into World War III, but essentially to make sure that countries that we helped would not turn communist. Okay. And so while we were trying to fund countries to rebuild them through World War II, other countries were getting funded by the Soviets. Okay. Yes. Yep. Yep. Mostly Western countries for sure. European.
Wait, is that the same one was like supply in the UK with
No, you're talking about the Lend-Lease Act. So that's prior to that, where we go, oh, we're not in war, but we'll lease you. Yeah. Okay. The Truman Doctrine was similar in terms of it tried to stop the expansion of the Soviet and communism, and that the Truman Doctrine was more of like a declaration of, hey, we will support you if you don't turn communist, essentially.
So what's the actual Truman Doctrine? It's just will help.
Yeah. So in the same way that the Monroe Doctrine is like, hey, this is our area, the Truman Doctrine is like a doctrine or a declaration of like, hey, if you don't, we will help you if you need help. Just you can't be communist.
So what's the difference between Marshall Plan?
Marshall Plan gave actual money. It was a plan. It was actually a plan. The Truman Doctrine was more of a statement theory type of thing.
Oh, so it's like Truman Doctrine was just like we're gonna do this, and Marshall Plan was like we actually did it. Or
yeah, and part of the Truman Doctrine gave money to Turkey and Greece, but it was an example of like, hey, don't turn communist. Okay, so and then Vietnam War, Korean War, and then the Cold War. You need to know a lot about McCarthyism and the Red Scare. Senator Joseph McCarthy, where he started accusing people of like, hey, you're communist, hey, you're communist. You guys remember learning that? You need to look that up. He had political figures, military figures. He had a blacklist. He said, I have a list of people in the government that are actually communists. And he was just feeding off of the scare, the fear of people. Because look, since World War II, we got into 2 wars, okay, about communists, Cuban Missile Crisis coming, and so he's playing into these fears. His wrong move is he accused the U.S. Army, one of U.S. Army general.
what did they do? How did they stop it?
So they pretty much like, what do you mean? How did they stop the Red Scare?
Yeah.
They called BS. Essentially, he just kept doing it. Right. He just kept doing it. I use the example of lice. Right. There's like a lice scare at our school, and the more people fed into it, the more people are like, oh my gosh, like everyone's got lice or people have lice. But then after like a week of everyone just kind of accusing everyone's got lice, you realize it's kind of like, wait, that was just BS. You know what I mean? Civil rights movement. Next court case that you need to know is Brown versus Board of Education. Please make sure you do that. Okay, Brown versus Board of Education, which overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay, yeah, it overturned segregation of schools, but Plessy versus Ferguson is a court case that you know that says separate is equal, Brown versus Board of Education goes separate is not equal. Okay. Plessy versus Ferguson said separate was equal. That's why they had separate schools, separate water fountains, and all that stuff. Brown versus Board of Education goes separate is not equal. It's not right to be.
Is that like the Little Rock?
Mhm.
That's where they started.
Mhm, for the civil rights movement, yes, it was have you no sense of decency. That's right, Carla. Make sure you look through your project, individual, group, and key event. Okay, so I assigned a project that had them research one and present one key individual, a group, and key event. So essentially, key people: Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Jackie Robinson. Who? Emmett Till. Okay, there's a couple of them. Key groups: CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. Okay. NAACP, Black Panthers. Did you say Wakanda? Little Rock 9 would be an event. Little Rock 9, Civil Rights Act of 1965. Those are key things. Like, make sure you have something in your like arsenal that you're ready to pull out. Don't try to look through everything. Just kind of like take a couple things so you could use as examples. For civil rights. Well, for everything. Every major concept, have something that you could specifically bring out. Birmingham is good. Selma is good. Literacy tests would be an example of like freedom rides. Okay. Black Power. Okay.
What were the things how that like Mr. Knockers at 4Q? I was like how did the blacks like kind of revolt against a lot of like
Oh yeah, like the freedom rides, like they sat in white cafeterias to force the integration. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
sit in protest, yeah.
Because like I didn't know like much of the strategies they used to like.
Oh, like.
Good. Make sure you know the Voting Rights Act because that is a key piece of legislation that happens. Brianna, you guys aren't taking the final until. I mean, tomorrow would be a good day to do it, but I don't think I'm gonna have you guys do it. I might have you guys do one more day of review, and you guys will do it next week. I might have you guys do short answer though. That might be quick to do. So and the ending part of this would be Nixon in the 80s, okay, and so Nixon calling for detente, 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 okay. And which called for like easing the tensions between the U.S. and communism.
Do we not have to know much about like JFK?
You should just make sure you know a little bit about his time period.
What about George Bush and like stuff? Because it was all.
So this is what I'm telling my class. That's 5%. If you ignore that 5%, 95% still an A. If you know one or two things from that time period, good. Okay, but mostly you should be fine.
It wouldn't be like an essay.
No.
Okay,
Watergate scandal. Nixon and the Watergate scandal essentially. Yeah, and Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. Okay, because there are recordings and wiretaps. Okay, during the campaign, Nixon had people like plant wiretaps and stuff like that. Yeah, so there's a couple that, I mean, there's Jimmy Carter. You can read a little bit about him, but I'd say that's pretty good for period 8. I'll try to do period 9.
Didn't he do something? Have you like implemented something? No. Was there nothing much about Jimmy Carter?
No, there is economy for Jimmy Carter. You can just look through that. Just read through that. I'll let
It
you.
was like something with like education. No? I forgot.
Oh, affirmative action, and the Bakke versus UC versus Bakke.
I don't know. I forgot what it was.
Action is? No, I don't. Action is like it basically gives like people in poverty.
Okay,
Like,
we're gonna go 10 more minutes, and then I'm gonna go talk about like. I'm done with content if you guys have questions, but I'm going to talk about the writing part of it, and we'll be done in like 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. So. Yeah. Okay. Cool. That works. All right. So
these gave people of poverty or minorities like advantage.
Oh, really?
Like sort of said that like because like they're not as like.
give me a minute. I need to check something real quick, and
Education stuff to get them
should be good. All right, here we go. Here's the last part. So the writing. So tomorrow, obviously tomorrow, but the DBQ and the LEQ, DBQ will focus on periods 3 to 8. Okay. And you have 60 minutes, 3 to 8. It's 25% of your exam score. So you need to make sure you cover every single part of the DBQ. Okay. And so I'm going to go through the rubric just really quickly. You get 1 point for the thesis and the claim. You get 1 point for contextualization. Your first paragraph should have the context and the thesis in there. Make sure it makes it definitive. So for example, if the prompt asks you to like evaluate or like the effectiveness of blah, 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 right? New Deal programs. You have to say the New Deal programs were effective and then list your categories if you'd like. But before you get to that, always set up an intro. That gives you the contextualization. Take whatever time period you're in. So FDR would be period 7, right? And you're looking at the progressive like thought or like just the different laborers or helping people like get jobs. Go one time period back. Go period 6. Populist, the AFL, any of the Knights of Labor that helped maybe set that up, right? And draw some sort of connection. 2 sentences to set up the context. 1 sentence or 2 sentences for your thesis. That's your 2 points already. Okay. And that's important because if you can set up your essay, make sure you connect it to a different time period and then give your thesis, your statement, like it did help, it was effective, it was not effective. Okay. That's going to give you the best chance. Then evidence. Okay. using your documents. So you get up to 3 points for documents. If you use 6 documents, you get 2 out of the 3 points. Do not list documents. Okay, you don't got to go, okay, like in A, B, C, like don't group them like that. I know we tend to have a problem to
You don't explain.
yeah, don't explain the documents. Because history teachers are reading this, so they don't need you to explain this. They just need you to connect it, okay?
Right. So then, like, it'd be like using document A instead of in document A. Or
You could say in document A, blah, 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 but you don't have to go. If in document A is about like FDR starting the New Deal, you have to go in document A, FDR decides to start the New Deal, because don't summarize it. You don't need to, okay?
so you can just replace it and just put in document A.
You could go in document A. FDR shows that the New Deal is going to be effective because blah, 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 blah. Does that make sense?
And what about when we are stating multiple documents?
Give interpretation and connection. A big way to do that is to identify perspective, audience, right? Soapstones, okay? Speaker, occasion, audience, perspective, tone. If you can identify that, you're going, look, oh, FDR, as he launches off these New Deal programs, is trying to push for change because it'll help and connect those ideas, right? If you use 3 documents, this is to answer your question, Mariana. If you use 3 documents, you get 1 point. If you use 6 documents, you get 2 points. And the third point is evidence beyond documents. So whatever the prompt is, I always encourage this. Don't look at the documents yet. You have 15 minutes to brainstorm, 45 minutes to write. They give you 5 extra minutes. So read the question, think of everything that you know to answer that question, and just start like brainstorming, right? The moment you read, like, evaluate the effectiveness of the New Deals, start to go, okay, FDR was president during the New Deal. This came as a result of the Great Depression. The Great Depression came as a result of stock market crash, bank failing, blah, blah, blah. And you just start brainstorming for about 5 minutes. Through that, you're going to look at the documents, and that they'll connect. If you can pick out any of the other things that you wrote that wasn't included in a document, that's going to be the point for using an additional piece of evidence, specific historical evidence that is not found in the documents. That's 3 easy points. Right now, that's 5. If you can get 5 out of 7 points, you're pretty good in terms of passing that part, okay, the writing part. Use 6 documents plus another source. Get your contextualization. It's not even asking you to analyze yet. If you want the 7, then you start analyzing documents. That's where the perspective, occasion, audience, speaker, tone all come into play. Contextualization is like bringing it into context. So like if it's talking about the FDR, you want to look at, you can even go, look, evaluate the effectiveness of FDR programs. Well, you go, look, post-World War II, during the Cold War, our economy was not struggling anymore. As a result, we can conclude that the New Deal programs were effective outside of the time period. You're putting it in the context.
So
Yep.
we could also do before.
You could do before or you could do after. And if you do both, yep. So because before you zoom into this main argument that you're about to bring, you want to go, look, this is everything that's happening. Let me show you why. Right.
So it's like FDR New Deal. You could say before there was depression, like the depression.
Depression, same time period. But you could maybe get away with that for contextualization because it's technically not periodization.
Did you bring it to this time period?
Yes. Okay. The easiest is to think, oh, I'm in period 7. Let me go period 6 or period 8.
So period 6, like we just talked about, like a populist.
Yes, you can talk about populism or like how like they tried to create change and like all that stuff. You don't have to quote, but you can quote. I'd say use it limitedly because you're gonna be wasting a lot of time. Joshua, if you want to come tomorrow at 6:30, I'll check your DBQ and we can talk about it. Okay. And then the last part, the 2 points for the DBQ, analysis and reasoning. So using it for at least 3 documents, explain how or why the document point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience is relevant to the argument. So if one of the documents was someone that was against the New Deal, you need to bring it in and go, well, look, she was against it because she was probably, and the main thing that you need to look at after you've done your brainstorming is, as you look at the sources, look at the sourcing. Who's saying it, who did it, who wrote it, and when. If you can get those, you're going to have a lot easier of a time identifying your sources. Then the last point, which is probably the hardest point to get, demonstrate a complex understanding of historical development that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the question. So that's just like further analysis, okay? Explaining similarities and differences, explaining causation, stuff like that. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's a 7-point DBQ rubric.
I have a question about using 6 jumps. Like, how do we like sort of like give the information? Do we like kind of like put in like a paragraph format and then just tell like jumps into parentheses, or do we say like
There's no right or wrong way. Are you leaving?
Yeah. Take him home.
Yeah, I'll take him. Yeah. Okay, so the key is this. The key is not summarizing, but grouping your documents. So if you go, look, these are the 3 documents that support FDR. You can go and you need to make sure each document has some sort of like, oh, this supports the New Deal because of this. It's the same thing. You go in document A, like the author supports the New Deal because she shows blah, 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 blah. Okay. Problem that most people get into when you get stuck is to like summarize. Don't summarize. Okay. Do not summarize. So synthesis is no longer a point, but you can gain the point for synthesis as contextualization. So if you take it outside of the time period, I think I mentioned this earlier in the year when we were working on DBQs. Yes. Yep. They essentially make it the same thing for you guys. Okay. And then lastly, and this is the last part, hopefully we'll wrap up in the next 5 minutes. Part B is a long essay question. It's 1 question, and now instead of 35 minutes, you get 40 minutes. It's 15% of your exam. It's worth 6 points. Okay. Long essay give you a short prompt, no stimulus. So let me share with you an example of those in a second. But you're gonna have, I guess they're giving you 3 options now. Okay, so they give you an option from periods 1 to 3. They give you an option from periods 4 to 6, and they give you an option from periods 7 to 9. So you get to choose one of 3. You answer the question. So I'll give you an example of an LEQ. Let's see if I can pull one up real quick. Excuse me. LEQ. So an LEQ would be like compare and contrast the views of the role of federal government and westward expansion between different political parties from 1800 to 1848. Right. It is. So how I'm gonna tell you how to break that down really quickly and hopefully in 5 minutes. But essentially, you need to make sure you answer the question. Okay. There are true statements and there are statements that answer the question. If I ask you, Kiri, what drink are you drinking right now? Right? Or Andrew, what drink are you drinking right now? And you go, well, you know, the cup is circle and it's a cold drink and there's a straw sticking out of it. All true statements doesn't answer the question. Answer the question. If it says, to what extent did expansion affect representation in Congress? You need to make sure you go, your thesis needs to say, I think your bag.
Was there anything else?
You need to make sure you answer the question. Seriously, if I can tell you one thing, it's as you start brainstorming and writing, you need to always go back to the main goal, which is to answer the question. Okay. The example I use is this. I've given a couple speeches before, like best man speeches. I gave the graduation speech at my school last year. The first one that I did was all over the place. I was making fun of him. I was blah, 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 like doing all these things. I was like yelling all these things. And I thought I was being funny. But the goal is not to be funny in a wedding speech, right? It's to celebrate the person. So my next speech, I learned from my mistake. Right when I was writing my speech, at the top of it, I wrote, celebrate this person, right? And the whole time, every time I wrote something, I always went back, am I celebrating him through this point, right? I'm going to want to write necessary things. I'm going to want to write stories that are true, but they don't celebrate him, right? I'm going to want to write, throw in little anecdotes that like, that may be funny for me and may be funny for him, but they don't celebrate him and his marriage, right? And so I always bring it back to that point. In this, keep going back to the prompt. If it tells you to evaluate the extent, you can't just go, look, expansion was good, it helped us grow. You need to go, expansion was crucial, or it was not important because this. And that's how you're going to answer it, okay? The LEQ rubric's actually really similar to the DBQ rubric, which has a thesis and contextualization.
Is it just like a paragraph, or should we like put like thesis and paragraph?
Thesis and contextualization in the first paragraph, and then your supporting paragraphs. Your long essay question should be about 5, 6, 7 paragraphs, maybe more.
5, 6, 7? I was thinking like 4. Like 3.
I was thinking
3. 3. Like
You have-
contextualization.
You have 40 minutes. You have 40 minutes. So you need to, that's the thing, you need to read it and just brainstorm for 5 minutes and just go.
They give us brainstorm time for a longer time.
Well, you need to allocate brainstorm time for yourself. Don't just start writing. Organize it.
Conclusion is like really basic. Right? We just restate.
You don't even need a conclusion. There's no point for conclusion, right? And if you do the contextualization at the top, then you don't need a conclusion. You just write it, and they'll give you points for each of these things. Okay. Let's see if there's any questions. Can contextualization be in the body paragraph? Yes, it can. You just need to be very clear. Okay. None of these rubrics show this needs to be in the beginning. Your thesis can technically be at the end. If you start off with a weak thesis and you write everything, and then you end with a rephrasing of your thesis, and that's stronger, they might give you your point for the second part of it. But there's no part that goes, your introduction paragraph needs to, you don't even need an introduction paragraph, really, okay? This is where things are important that change from the DBQ to LEQ. After thesis and contextualization, you need to give evidence. That's 2 points. So provide specific examples of evidence. You have this? Okay. Relevant to the topic, supports an argument, response. So you need to have an argument. Do not just state facts. It was helpful. It was not helpful. It sucked. Okay, something. Something is better than just saying it is.
So like in that example, you gave us
So your argument would be, so that's a good point. So what I say, compare and contrast the views of the role of federal government and Western expansion between different political parties of 1840 to 1848. So your view needs, in this, you need to talk about, one, you need to identify these things, right? So what were the different roles of political parties, ideals, and what were their views on westward expansion? Then you need to take a stance in terms of, was westward expansion, or was one view maybe better than another? Was one view more accepted? Was one view...
so like in this case, like because of West.
You can talk about how like the political parties, the Whigs, did not want expansion because it would create imbalance of like slave and free states. This became a problem because as we expanded, there was a conflict which eventually led to the Civil War. That's contextualization right there. You just talked about the Civil War, which happens 10 years later, right? Let's see. Would it be helpful to use contextualization on your DBQ? Yes, you do. It is a point. Yep. So after you give your evidence, so to earn 1 point, responses must identify specific historical examples of evidence relevant. Use as much as you can. drop things in. You can't lose points, you can gain points. Does that mean you just barf on it? No. It means you put as much as you think can help you and explain it.
So, like, would you say, like, there's not really such a thing as, like, an obvious, like, contextualization?
Yeah, there's no obvious one. It's whatever you want to do with
So, like,
it.
even if it's, like, late 1800s, you can say, like, after the Civil War.
Yes. The more specific you get, the better, obviously. Yeah, I mean, you can talk about, like, expansion played a role because through the expansion led to the Civil War, which led to whatever, and that's your broad. Try to spend one or two sentences on contextualization, setting up where it's going to go.
So, like, we can, like, just say, like, anything as long as it, like, ties into, like, your main point.
And it doesn't even need to tie into your main point. It just needs to set up what you're about to say. So your thing about different political parties and westward expansion might not even get to slavery. But if you set up the Civil War and slavery and fighting North and South to go into look, this came as a result because there was different views of expansion. Okay. And the last part, analysis and reasoning, talks about using historical reasoning. So comparison, causation, change in continuity over time to frame or structure an argument that addresses a prompt. That's one point. If you show complex understanding, which means like you can show like the opposite point of view and like still show how yours is stronger, it's going to be good. Okay. Look through that. I think it's going to be important for you guys to just kind of skim through the rubric before you guys go into it. Small connection, yeah, just one or two sentences. Any last questions? Any questions about the writing part? You guys got the short answer part that I talked to you guys about yesterday, right? Like crossing out the letters.
Oh yeah.
Okay, or bring an eraser, just erase it. Write more, not less. You have time. Sorry, cross it out. Okay.
I'm stealing one of the pens. I should steal it earlier.
I hope so, Joshua. Oh, Khatib, you came back.
They're good.
Wait, they could
Yeah.
They're good.
If you need it.
Okay, so it is. They might be. Okay, so is there a limit to how much you should write? No, there's no limit. Write more. Use your space. Oh, also, there's a box when you guys answer the questions. Don't write outside the box. They can't grade outside the box. Write on the lines, okay? It might get cut off. Yeah, I believe in you guys. Okay, hey, last thing. Instincts. Trust your instincts, okay? Because your instincts on multiple choice or your writing part are there for a reason. That means you've learned something. For some reason, your mind is taking you to a place. So if you guys can do that, you'll be fine, okay? Dang, 2 hours. Good job. Hey, I will see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 a.m., okay? If you guys have any more questions, save it.
Yo, send me the Addy to that party.
Okay, yeah, so see you guys tomorrow, 6:30. I'll be there for any last minute things. I have bananas, granola bars, gummies, stuff for you guys. So see you guys later.
Bye-bye.
My friend has the same book.
It's a good book.
You didn't end it.
Good luck, guys.
Yes.